Hello, friends. We are going to continue reading Ramona Quimby, age 8. Yesterday we read chapter 7, which was Ramona being the patient. She was still very sick, and Mom took off work to take care of her. She watched some commercials and learned that commercials don't always tell the truth because they're just trying to get the product to sell, which will be very important in this chapter. And she received a packet of cards from her class and learned that she has a book report to write and found out that things aren't still going so well for their family. A little rough. So, we are going to read chapter 8, Ramona's book report. The Quimby family was full of worries. The parents were worried about managing without a car while a new transmission was installed, and even more worried about paying for it. Beezus was worried about a party she had been invited to because boys had also been invited. She was afraid it would turn out to be a dancing party, and she felt silly trying to dance. Besides, 8th grade boys acted like a bunch of little kids at parties. Ramona, still feeling weak, moped around the house for another day, worrying about her book report. If she made it interesting, Mrs. Welly would think she was showing off. If she did not make it interesting, her teacher would not like it. On top of everything, Beezus happened to look at her father's head as he bent over his books at the dining room table that evening. "Daddy, you're getting thin on top." "That means he's losing hair," she cried out, shocked. Ramona rushed to look. "Just a little thin," she said, because she did not want her father's feelings to be hurt. "You aren't bald yet." Mrs. Quimby also examined the top of her husband's head. "It is a little thin," she agreed, and kissed the spot. "Never mind, I found a gray hair last week." "What is this, a conference about my hair?" asked Mr. Quimby, and he grabbed his wife around the waist. "Don't worry," he told her. I'll still love you when you're old and gray." "Thanks a lot," said Mrs. Quimby, not wanting to think of herself as old or gray. They both laughed. Mr. Quimby released his wife and gave her a playful slap on the bottom, an act that amused and shocked his daughters. Ramona had two feelings about this conversation. She did not want her father's hair to grow thin or her mother's hair to grow gray. She wanted her parents to stay exactly as they were forever and ever. But oh, how good it was to see them be so affectionate with one another. She knew her mother and father loved one another, but sometimes when they were tired and hurried or when they had long, serious conversations after the girls had gone to bed, she wondered and worried because she knew children whose parents had stopped loving one another. Now she knew everything was all right. Suddenly, Ramona felt so happy that a book report did not seem so difficult after all, and she could think of a way to make it interesting. The book, The Left Behind Cat, which Mrs. Welly had sent home for Ramona to read for her report, was divided into chapters, but used babyish words. The story was about a cat that was left behind when a family moved away and about its adventures with a dog, another cat, and some children before it finally found a home with a nice old couple who gave it a saucer of cream and named it Lefty because its left paw was white and because it had been left behind. Medium boring, thought Ramona. Good enough to pass the time on the bus, but not good enough to read during sustained silent reading. Besides, cream costs too much to give to a cat. The most the old people would give a cat was half and half, she thought. Ramona required accuracy, which means being right, from her books as well as from people. "Daddy, how do you sell something?" Ramona interrupted her father, who was studying even though she knew she should not. However, her need for an answer was urgent, which means she needed one right now. Mr. Quimby did not look up from his book. "You ought to know. You see enough commercials on television." Ramona considered his answer. She had always looked upon commercials as entertainment, but now she thought about some of her favorites. The cats that danced back and forth. The dog that pushed away brand X dog food with his paw. The man who ate a pizza, got indigestion, and groaned that he couldn't believe he ate the whole thing. The 6 horses that pulled the Wells Fargo Bank stagecoach across deserts and over mountains. Do you mean I should do a book report, like a TV commercial? Ramona asked. Why not? Mr. Quimby answered in an absent-minded way. I don't want my teacher to say I'm a nuisance, said Ramona, needing assurance from a grown-up. This time Mr. Quimby lifted his eyes from his book. Look, he said, she told you to pretend you're selling the book, so sell it. What better way than a TV commercial? You aren't being a nuisance if you do what your teacher asks. He looked at Ramona a moment and said, Why do you worry she'd think you're a nuisance? Ramona stared at the carpet, wiggled her toes inside her shoes, and finally said, I squeaked my shoes the first day of school. That's not being much of a nuisance, said Mr. Quimby. And when I got egg in my hair, Mrs. Welly said I was a nuisance, confessed Ramona, and then I threw up in school. But you didn't do those things on purpose, her father pointed out. Now run along. I have studying to do. Ramona thought this answer over and decided that since her parents agreed they must be right, well, Mrs. Welly could just go jump in a lake, even though her teacher had written, without wasting words, that she missed her. Ramona was going to give her book report any way she wanted, so there, Mrs. Welly. Ramona went to her room and looked at her table, which the family called Ramona's studio, because it was a clutter of crayons, different kinds of paper, scotch tape, bits of yarn, and odds and ends that Ramona used for amusing herself. Then Ramona thought a moment, and suddenly filled with inspiration, she went to work. She knew exactly what she wanted to do and set about doing it. She worked with paper, crayons, scotch tape, and rubber bands. She worked so hard and with such pleasure that her cheeks grew pink. Nothing in the whole world felt as good as being able to make something from a sudden idea. Finally, with a big sigh of relief, Ramona leaned back in her chair to admire her work. 3 cat masks with holes for eyes and mouths. Masks that could be worn by hooking rubber bands over ears. But Ramona did not stop there. With pencil and paper, she began to write out what she would say. She was so full of ideas that she printed rather than waste time in cursive writing. Next, she phoned Sarah and Janet, keeping her voice low and trying not to giggle, so she wouldn't disturb her father any more than necessary, and explained her plan to them. Both her friends giggled and agreed to take part in the book report. Ramona spent the rest of the evening memorizing what she was going to say. We will pick it up tomorrow with the last half of chapter... What chapter was that? 8? Yeah, the last half of chapter 8. How do you think Ramona's book report's going to go? What's she going to do with those cat masks? Stay tuned to find out.